आ रहे हैं। एंड जब हम लोगों ने वाओ ज्वाइन किया विमेन ऑन वेल्थ, तब हमको पता चला कि अरे बुक्स तो है ही बेस्ट फ्रेंड्स, लेकिन हमारी जो सेविंग्स और इन्वेस्टमेंट जो मंथ ऑन मंथ होती है ना, वो तो सबसे बड़ी बेस्ट फ्रेंड है हमारी। So what we try to do at Women on Wealth Money Book Club, we thought of combining both. हमारी जो बुक्स है वो बेस्ट फ्रेंड्स है, और हमारी जो मनी हैबिट्स है, जो हमारी सिप्स है, वो भी हमारी बेस्ट फ्रेंड्स है. So we have combined both the things over here, and we bring forth in front of you books related to finance, personal, health, everything related to money. I mean, जो भी है वो पैसा है, पैसे से बड़ा कुछ भी नहीं है. जो कोविड ने हमको सिखाया है कि बाप बड़ा ना भैया, सबसे बड़ा रुपया. And this Money Book Club by Women on Wealth, it is a free platform where we read one book at a time. And the mission of Women on Wealth is to create 50 lakh women wealth creators by 2030. And the book that we are reading, everybody must be knowing, The Little Book That Creates Wealth by Pat Dorsey. And in short, the crux of the book is it provides a sensible framework for identifying companies that can sustain high returns on capitals. And Pat Dorsey tells the reader how to look for those durable, competitive companies. And the chapters, the last two chapters which we have read, chapter 11 and 12, there also author outlines a few points, few criteria as to how to identify those modes, and I mean, what we should be looking at. Though the author has written this book in American context, but modes तो सब जगह ही होते हैं, whether Indian or whether American. तो आज जो है हम we are going to have a beautiful and interesting discussion wherein Smriti would be just postmortem करेगी मोड्स का इंडियन कंपनीज पे कि इस बुक को हम इंडियन कंपनी पे कैसे अप्लाई करें. एंड इन चैप्टर 11 ऑथर ने 3 मेन क्राइटेरियाज हमको दिए हैं. ऑथर ने बताया है कि वी नीड टू सी द मनी, आई मीन ऑथर वांट्स अस टू सी द मनी कि पिछले 10 सालों में कंपनी ने कितना रिटर्न दिया है. वी नीड टू फर्स्ट चेक दैट इज द बिगेस्ट क्राइटेरिया. Second, he says competitive advantage, कितना competition से stand out वो कैसे करती है. And third, author says how durable that advantage is likely to be, like in the coming 10 years, where that moat is going to stand out. So over to you, Smriti. Let's dissect an Indian company and understand moats in a much better way. Over to you.
Thanks, Prachi. The biggest mistake that we investors make is going by the brand value of the company. It's we keep thinking that just because huge companies are in our face all the time, we think that it's a company that we should be investing in and it'll give us good returns and stuff. But we've seen historically that the numbers don't always match. It could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because it's of a temporary setback. It could be a cyclical stock, or it could be because of wrong business practices. However, to understand the difference between something that makes the company unique versus something that makes the company go and sustain for like a good 25, 30, even 100 years, like we see in a lot of cases, it has those different value systems. Sometimes it has a different it has a different agenda, the way they do it, that is very different to the rest of the companies that are maybe prosperous for 10 years and then you'll find them disappearing altogether. What makes these companies stand out is the economic moats that they have around them. Moats, by definition, means something that isolates your company against constant rivals. Let's do a deep dive into this. So usually when there are new companies that hit the market, it usually has something new about it. That is why the whole hype is created about it. Like it has something new. Like suppose now when Xerox first came out, the machine that it came out with was called a photocopier. But because it was the first thing in its market, it came to be known as Xerox. Now everywhere we go, we're like, okay, just of course Xerox kara de do. You know, rather than saying, please print it out or please photocopy it out for me. That becomes its unique selling proposition, like something that makes it stand out from everything else. Now, whether that proposition goes the distance is something that we whether it's created a moat that isolates it and makes it stand away from other companies is something that only time can tell. However, what is a USP? A USP is a marketing strategy used by a business to differentiate its products and or services from the competition, thus enabling a business to gain a long-term advantage. Thus building a viable business model. When it is used correctly, this strategy helps a business develop a competitive advantage by defining a compelling, unique selling point or a unique value proposition. It enables a business to differentiate itself from its competitors. It it enables a business to stand for something that they become known amongst consumers, and it is also crucial for operating successfully in competitive markets. Now they do it through, ideally, traditionally, it's done in two ways. First, through low cost advantages, like they undercut their rivals, or they come out with a really cheap product at a better high point, or because it's just unique, like the case of Xerox. What this leads to, the biggest advantage is obviously that it becomes brand recognition. It's attractive to the consumers. There's a loyalty built towards it. Instant recall value, and of course reduced cost, because when you become popular, there are obviously more sales that happen, and as a result, they're uh, able to give that back to the consumers in the form of cheaper products. However, uh, that can be temporary in nature. Why? Because there are always competitors, technology is advancing forever. So what remains unique will not always remain unique. But these are the foundations of creating an economic moat. Whether that translates into an economic moat is lies solely in the hands of the company. What economic modes do, it enables a long-term competitive advantage. It represents long-term business defensibility as to how long a business can retain its competitive advantage in the marketplace. Warren Buffett refers it to a share of mind, which does not necessarily translate to market share, because that is where the dichotomy comes, where people think just because you're ruling the roost, they have a large market share. It does not necessarily mean that it translates into brand recall value, or it's the first thing that applies to your mind. Like, for example, we recently learned that, like, we've all grown up reading about Bata. Like, the first thing when it comes to slippers and our household wear, Bata comes to mind. However, companies like Bata are not the market leaders, it's another company. So, that is where the whole duality comes in. Another interesting aspect that I learned is that these companies control the supply chain management that of their entire line. So what they do is they follow a concept known as disintermediation. It's a which is a process in which intermediaries, like a third party organizers, are removed from the supply chain. So these middlemen who eat away at the profits get cut out. So the company has sole ownership over the supply chain through franchising of the model. Like Asian Paints is pretty well known for that, because rather than having warehouses of their products, they have retailers who store it, and they produce the products on the job. And thus, in this way, they create a monopoly in the market through franchising. And thus, this creates a wide moat which insulates them from the competitors. So, what are the different types of economic moats? High switching costs, where it is not financially viable for for like suppose now you have a software, okay, and and you've been using the software for many years, but you want to switch over to another software because it's new, the market has more features, but it is very, because the software is so entrenched in a system, it is not financially viable, it is not physically viable to move from one to the other because it's too expensive, there's high labor involved, it disrupts the entire system that you've created. The network effect, both are created uh, when the value of the company's service that they provide through after sales service or even during the supply chain management, it increases the goodwill, it increases the benefit for both new and existing consumer users as more people use the service. Then, of course, controlling the supply chain management and the distribution network is another mode. It's more cost advantage when you go with an established company at cost effective prices, uh, and of course, because it's a good, the service and the goods are still as good as it always used to be. Size advantage relative to its rivals. If it's a monopoly, if it's a big company, they can pass on the 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 low cost uh, effect to it, and of course the network effect. Again, it ties back to the network effect because it's more easily available. Then there are other intangible assets, like like creating a brand value, like companies like Asian Paints, companies like even high-end goods like Dior and Hyatt. Uh, their brands charge for premium pricing because they know the quality is good, they're established in the market. People are like crazy about using their products. Intellectual properties, of course, IP, it's one of a kind. Copyright issues, patents, especially the pharma industry, it creates a monopoly of sorts. Like we were saying, the whole fiasco around pharma companies are wanting to let go of the patents when it comes to COVID vaccines over to generic manufacturers. Why? Because it destroys the very moat on which they are based on. Then again, niche markets where it's a very isolated sector, there are very few players in the market. Uh, so obviously, uh, it's better to be a small company with limited competitors, where you have a chance to grow in an under in a sector that's not very high, very entrenched or very it's full of competitors. Then, of course, technology. Uh, Software models, we've seen that software related technology, they reverse patents and high switching costs, as those are like one of a kind. And hardware is replaceable and capital intensive, but softwares, like like for example, Word. It is easier for us to use Word than to because we've grown up with it. It's been around for us for like we don't know how many years, for a good 25, 30 years, versus going to Google Docs, which not everybody has the facility to access. So MS has created that mode that, like the first thing that everybody thinks of when it comes to Office suites is Microsoft. And then, of course, I found something very interesting, that because India is a developing market, as opposed to say the more advanced markets like the UK and the US, our dynamics are a little different to, they're similar, but they're a little different to other uh, more developed companies, is because the way we work also makes a difference. Most of our entrenched companies, like you could say Tata, you could say Asian Paints, you could say so many of these others, their primary foundations is built on trust. It is built on, like even Amul, for example. It's built on the reputation. It's the first thing that strikes your mind. I recall value. They are very good at creating nostalgia around their products, because most of these companies we've all grown up with, we've been using their products ever since our parents, our grandparents have been using these products. They've created that whole nationality feeling around it, patriotism around it. And of course, these companies have also ensured that to enter this sector, there's a high entry barrier. For them, it is these newcomers who have to try to penetrate the market. It's not cost viable because these guys have created monoliths. So to try to break down that moat itself will take you like another 100 years. And we don't know whether it's going to be worth the hassle as well. However, it doesn't matter. The biggest moat of them all that we have forgotten to actually uh, value is the non-negotiables, that which include superior quality products, low costing, creating a brand that is sustainable. It gives it has a good reputation in the market. Uh, Building a good supply chain management, even if you are planning to take it over, where everybody benefits. It doesn't matter whether you are the peon in the company or a helper in the company or you're the end service. Everybody along whoever the company comes in contact with has only good it follows good company practices and good value systems. They actually take feedback from customers and incorporate them into their products when it comes to R&D. And then they're very good at building an experience around their products, which obviously leads to longevity. And then how do economic modes convert into profits is wow. Okay, so when the company has an economic moat, they're obviously able to control the price, and then obviously, wow. Because the company has an economic moat deeply entrenched, they're able to say that these are the preferred products in the market, and then as a result, even if the market share is not number one, they are still able to control the pricing. So even when there's a price increase, the demand remains unaffected, and then hence that leads to more profit. As opposed to other smaller companies that if they increase the price, people are more liable to switch to other uh, companies, and hence as a result, the demand reduces, and then there is less profit. And yeah, so these are some of the references we can do for further reading and more in-depth study. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Smriti, for bringing that clarity. And now over to all of you who are present here. Any thoughts that are building for you, anything you'd like to add to this? And also pick up items. Yeah, and pick up items from the book. Yes, feel free to also ask your questions.
शीतल, आई वाज थिंकिंग हम एशियन पेंट्स को लेके उसके थोड़ा सा और वो करें डिस्कशन कि उसके मोड्स कैसे हैं लाइक इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में. आई बिलीव शायद उससे थोड़ी और क्लैरिटी आएगी.
Definitely, Prachi. I think it has come to this point where we try and extract some guidelines from this book and see how we can, practically apply. And we've been meaning to do that. So if we were to look at a company like Asian Paints that we so well, everybody knows it well. And a simple approach I may apply is like the book guides us. Look at its capital employed, the returns on it. And with Asian Paints, if you look at on Screener, then it does show that it is easily giving over 30% year on year. I had checked that last night, and you can double check that. Okay. Then I would maybe move to asking certain questions around, okay, what are the intangible assets this company has, and I am picking everything from the book, right? And then we can go on to discuss each point, whatever you have found about the company, whatever you think around those items, and that's the approach we can have.
Because,
Yeah, sorry, Smriti, please go ahead. Please.
yeah, so I was thinking that let us all have a discussion. Let's take Asian Paints, for example. And then, since there are some of us who are familiar with the company, let's go back to what we know about the company, and then have a look at the votes that were shared just now, and then see whether which ones are applicable to that particular company. If there's just one that is applicable, or there are multiple votes that are applicable. So let's have like some kind of discussion about that, so that it becomes easier for people who are not familiar with it to be able to say, "Acha, ha, this is not a USP, this is a vote." You know, let's go back to square one if that's possible. I mean, I can share the slides again.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, should I, or do you want to first look at the figures? Where do we go first?
Anyone here who would like to see the figures? You can show it on screener.
Okay, just give me a second.
If there are our lovely viewers would like to see where they can find.
Show me the number.
Yes. Show me the number and then show me the money.
Let's do this.
Yeah. So here we
Okay.
are on screener. Yeah. We can go to a balance sheet and that's where it will show us.
Yes. Let me just make this a little bigger so we can all see it. There.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, if we scroll down. हाँ वहाँ पे ना ये रहा rows नीचे.
Ratios. Yes.
So you can see for the past 10-11 years. So in some way, it passes what Pat Dorsey suggests. Let's look at the numbers and if they're impressive, and they have Asian Paints has pretty impressive numbers, right? And then of course in our stocks program, we do a lot of other filters, but going by the book looks like, okay, good to look at its modes. Now we can continue with the intangible assets.
Okay.
Yes, and the book says in intangible assets, is it a popular brand or a profitable brand? If I may highlight this, okay. And what is a profitable brand? According to the book, a brand creates an economic moat only if it increases a consumer's willingness to pay or increases customer captivity. So when you think of Asian Paints, do you think it's a profitable brand?
It is.
It is a profitable brand, undoubtedly.
Since we are talking about intangible assets, I don't know if I'm exactly addressing that heading, but there's something that I just read about Asian Paints as recently as yesterday, and since we've taken it up, I'd like to share. So what happened was that, see, first of all, paints basically come from crude oil, so definitely, the costing and everything definitely depends on how much the oil prices really swing. Having said that, what Asian Paints did was, during the last lockdown, I'm not sure about the second wave, but around the first wave when everything was shut, they made sure that their retailers did not suffer, and they put in sizable chunks of amounts into their pocket. So it was no surprise that the moment the unlock would happen, what would move first, you know, Asian Paints. So they took care. So I don't know if it really comes under that heading, but I would say their value system with respect to their supply chain management and towards their channel partners. I mean, that commitment is something as impressive as their numbers, if not more. And I think you know, kind of watched a video by Saurabh Mukherjee. So in that, because Asian Paints is again one of his favorite babies, and he mentioned it in his videos that, you know, they made sure that nobody crashes once the unlock happens, and they made advance payments to all their channel partners.
In fact, supply chain is their biggest moat. I mean, even I was reading somewhere and also hearing Saurabh Mukherjee's videos. So उसमें भी he said कि like supply chain is their biggest moat. I mean, उनका जो turn around time है, that is so small कि वो किसी को inventory रखने की जरूरत ही नहीं होती है. I mean, वो 3-3 दफा supply करते हैं अपने जो retailers हैं. So that is their biggest advantage. I mean, the biggest moat, and no competitor can beat it. as of now. I mean, आज कल का पता नहीं, but आज तो नहीं कोई बीट कर सकता.
Yeah, because Berger Paints is 1/3 their size, at least as of today. So the number one and number two have a huge gap of almost 3x. So
इनका जो market share है, that is 40+. तो मतलब big difference between number 1 and number 2.
So that becomes the
हमने
size.
check किया around 40-42 के around था, 40-42.
And Berger Paint has like 13 to 14%.
हाँ, 13-14%.
It's, yeah.
Huge difference.
I would say it actually
Any other thing
has
which,
two economic modes. One is, of course, that hold on, let's go back to that slide. Let's go back to that slide. So we could say that it has good intangible assets, size advantage relative to its rivals, a good network effect, because they have done a good job in controlling the distribution network, as well as they're able to retain as well as acquire new and existing users. Then, of course, they are very good. They have a very good reputation in the market. They've been able to create goodwill through their CSR and philanthropy efforts. And of course, they've created a good high entry barrier for other potential competitors when it comes to, while creating a moat. So I would say they don't have just one clear moat, they have a couple of them. But again, it depends on how long they're able to sustain their moat. And for a company that's been around for like, since 1942, they're doing a pretty good job at improving the way their management works, the way they're able to retain what their core values are. And that, I think, is what makes it a very good example of a company with economic moats. What do you guys think?
In fact, they are diversifying also. They're like, coming up in all other verticals. वो किचन में भी आ रहे हैं, वो बाथरूम में भी आ रहे हैं, और वो फर्नीचर में भी आ रहे हैं. Like, they're everywhere as far as a house is concerned.
So they are also, they're diversifying their products. So that, I guess, then that's a good sign as well, because all these companies are very cash rich. So they're able to retain that as well as diversify and create a more linear advantage rather than just aiming for the top. It's more spread out.
When the profit,
so their profit comes from multiple sources rather than just one source. Diversification of sorts, which is a good sign, isn't it?
That's good for us also as investors, because when you're investing in a paint company, indirectly also investing in sanitary ware and interiors. And so I, instead of having to look for multiple companies, through one you're basically getting access to other verticals as well.
Got that. So, loving the discussion today. It feels very different. And so, one of the chapters is on eroding moats. So now, if you've identified two, three economic moats at this point for this company, any chance that you can see that some of these moats might erode? And jokingly last evening I had said that अगर लोग घर पेंट करना छोड़ दे तो ये इकोनॉमिक मोड वीक हो सकता है but क्या ये possible है so yeah, any chance you see that that these could erode for Asian Paints, for example?
देखो वॉलपेपर तो आ गया है, लेकिन वॉलपेपर फिर भी ना लोग एक ही वॉल पे लगाते हैं, वो पूरे चारों वॉल पे वॉलपेपर नहीं लगाएंगे। और अगर हम रूरल इंडिया की तरफ जाते हैं तो रूरल इंडिया में अभी भी उनको पेंटिंग ही करनी है, उनको वॉलपेपर्स और उस चीज से कोई अभी कोई मतलब नहीं है। तो मेरे को लगता है कि अभी स्कोप बहुत है इसमें, अभी इसका मोट इरोड नहीं होने वाला।
It's funny you said that, Sheetal, because thanks to COVID last year, they had a pretty bad financial year from 2020 to 2021 during a first lockdown, because there were a couple of months where there wasn't a single paint can sold anywhere in the country. So I guess you were kind of right also unknowingly, because that's exactly what happened. But because these companies, because see, COVID of course is a very one-off, I hope one-off case, they were able to, they were able to sustain that loss of income, and as a result, they went back, and because it was like a public health crisis, they made sure that their workforce and their labor force were well looked after, so that ultimately, when their labor force is well looked after, taken care of, so when things pick up again, they're more likely to, you know, retain their loyalty. They're able to rebound faster, both the company and the workforce, because a company is only as good as the workforce retention. It doesn't matter how good your quality, how superior it is. If you have a high workforce turnover, nothing on earth is going to stop the company from crashing. So that is how they have been able to retain, just ride out that emergency crisis, and been able to create more goodwill for them. So a company that keeps its workers happy is also a happy company, profitably and otherwise also.
And what I would like to propose is, using this simple structure, and we begin from here, right? Uh, you can also attempt, and the book is there to explain what each one means. And if you'd like to recommend a company or two that we could further study using the guidelines of the book, and then bring them for the discussion next week. Okay, that's something that I think will be interesting. So if you have companies in mind, do recommend, so that we can all look at them. Okay. And now, anything from the chapters that we picked up that you guys would like to add, or something you didn't understand? I know there was one part I didn't really quite get, which I would like others to help me understand. But yeah, giving this time to everybody who read the chapters, and anything interesting that you'd like to share. These were chapters 11 and 12. Anything anything for anyone. So I will share some things from chapter 12 points that I have underlined. For example, it says here again that first, every company is slightly different, which makes comparisons tough. So, which will probably make studying economic modes tougher for us. Okay. Then it says second, the value of a company is directly tied to its future financial performance, which is unknown. Okay, the value of a company is directly tied to its future financial performance. Then he goes on to say the good news is that you don't need to know the precise value of a company before buying its shares. All you need to know is that the current price is lower than the most likely value of the business. कुछ समझ में आया?
Can you repeat the last line, Shitu, please?
It says.
I wasn't paying attention, sorry.
It says. So yeah, ये बोलता है कि see in the previous paragraph it talks about the value of the company is directly tied to its future financial performance, which is unknown, though we can obviously make some educated guesses. Okay, like we can now looking at the data, some qualitative analysis of AP, we can probably say that some educated guess about, okay, I think in the next 10 years also it'll do good, you know. For these reasons, most people focus on the information that is easily attainable about stocks. That means their market prices, something that is easily attainable, rather than the information that is harder to obtain rather than the information that is harder to obtain, like their business values. And that's the bad news, he says. The good news is that you don't need to know the precise value of a company before buying its shares. All you need to know is that the current price is lower than the most likely value of the business. That may sound confusing, he admits. So he helps us with an example. So yeah. You want me to read this? Anything anybody would like to add? किसी को समझ में आया ये वाला? Siba is also thinking. कुछ तो बत्ती जला कहीं पे.
लेकिन अभी वो
बोल नहीं पा रहे.
moment नहीं आया है.
And yeah, so now he gives an example. In the summer of 2007, right? I noticed that a company I had had my radar screen for some years called Corporate Executive Board had dropped in price by about half over the previous year. The company had been growing sales and earnings at a blistering pace of over 30% per year for a few years. And for a variety of reasons, things hit a wall. Sales growth slowed considerably and earnings growth dropped. Yes, Seema, we can hear you. Seema, did you say hello? Can't hear you, Seema. Okay, I'm gonna continue reading. Okay, so अभी तक समझ में आया that so company बहुत अच्छा कर रहा था वो. Then something happened. Okay, so things hit a wall. Sales growth slowed considerably, and earnings growth also dropped to about 10%. Okay, then so from 30% it's come down to 10%. So Pat did some research and he says he was convinced that the company had plenty of room left to grow in its market. Now this is interesting because I think when we just look at the numbers coming down, the first instinct might be something strong with the company. We may not immediately look at it as an opportunity, right? So he
शीतल,
says,
sorry to interrupt. If you could share the screen ना, तो वो हम पढ़ेंगे ना तो हमको और ज्यादा clear होगा. अभी we are hearing तो इतना ना कुछ चीजें miss हो रही हैं.
Page 12, chapter 12 में है ना?
161. Okay, so अभी सुनो, ठीक है? अभी सुनो. So we have read till the part that sales growth slowed down. Then he's saying that left in his research, he was convinced that the company had plenty of room left to grow in its market. I was also confident that corporate executive board's competitive position was still very strong. Would the company return to its 30% growth rate, or would future growth be lower, say 15%? I really didn't know, and the valuation of the shares was very different under those two scenarios. So 30% growth may and 15% may valuation, very different. So why did I buy the stock? Because while I did not know exactly what corporate executive board's shares were worth, I did know that the stock price at the time implied that the market was assuming a 10% growth rate. So the market was assuming a 10% growth rate. So my task was simply to decide how likely it was that the company would never grow faster than 10%. Ab samjhe? Right? So my task was simply to decide how likely it was that the company would never grow faster than 10%. Based on my research, I thought that was a very unlikely outcome, and so I bought the stock. If the company returned to a 15% growth rate, my investment would do pretty well. And if the company returned to a 20+% growth rate, I would have a home run. Only if the company decelerated to a single-digit growth rate would I lose money. And I thought the odds of that happening were acceptably low. So which means that market assumed it as 10%. है ना? तो अगर वो 15-20 चला गया तो अमेजिंग है. क्या उसके नीचे आ सकती है, सिंगल डिजिट में हो गया, then he would lose money. But that is something that he thought was a slim chance of that happening. So he further says, in this example, I reverse engineered the price of the shares to see what kinds of growth expectations were baked in. So this is, I think, important for us, you know, his approach. He reverse engineered the price of the shares to see what kinds of growth expectations were baked in. The key takeaway is that I didn't have to know exactly what the future would bring, which is very encouraging. I just had to know that the future was very likely going to be brighter than the share price implied. In the case of corporate executive board, I thought the stock would be worth anywhere from $85 to $130. But I was confident that the stock would not be worth much less than its $65 price share. Of course, time will tell if I was right. The simple exercise of estimating the value of a share of a company is the key to buying stocks for less. अब यहाँ में valuation सिखा रहा है. Intrinsic value पे कैसे खरीदा जाता है, which is a tough task. The simple exercise of estimating the value of a share of a company is the key to buying stocks for less than their potential value. Because in order to buy the shares for less than their value, you need to have some idea of what that value is. It It sounds simple, but you would be amazed at how many investors have never tried to value the stocks they buy. And at this point, I will share the screen, and I think it is going to create a lot of value for everybody to read the next part on what is the company worth anyway, right? And so somebody please volunteer who would like to read it for everybody. उसको धीरे धीरे पढ़ना, ठीक है? First 1 minute.
I can do.
कोई आ रहा है रीड करने?
Yeah, I can try, but मैं बहुत नई हूँ, so.
So you just have to read it. You just have to read it, and I will share it on the screen.
I am able to share. It's okay.
Awesome, awesome.
Perfect. What is a company worth anyway? It's a simple question. So here's a simple answer. A stock is worth the present value of all the cash it will generate in the future. That's it. Let's pick up this idea apart a bit. Companies create value by investing capital and generating a return on that investment. Some of the cash that a company generates pays operating expenses, some gets reinvested back in the business, and the remainder is what's called free cash flow. Free cash flow is often called owner earnings because that's really what it is. The amount of money that could be extracted from a business every year by the firm's owners without harming the company's operations. Think of free cash flow like the money a landlord clears at the end of every year. The owner of an apartment building gets rent, sales, pays for mortgage and some annual upkeep, operating expenses, and occasionally spends some money for major repairs like a new roof or new windows, capital expenditures. What's left over is his or her personal free cash flow, which can be tucked away in a bank account, spent on a nice Florida vacation, or used to buy another apartment building. But whatever the landlord uses it for, it's not money that is needed to keep the apartment building functioning as a cash generating enterprise. Let me know, Sheetal, if you want me to stop and go through it.
Sure, sure. If anybody would like to take a pause and discuss or ask for clarity, you can put that in the chat so we can pause. Thank you. I think we can continue for now, probably. Thank you.
Sticking with the landlord example, let's think about what would make a building full of rental apartments worth more or less to a prospective purchaser. Growth would certainly push the value up if a building had an adjacent patch of land on which a landlord could build more apartments. It would be worth more than a building without that land, as the stream of potential future rental income would be larger. The same goes for the riskness of the rental income. A building full of seasoned wage earners would be worth more than the same building full of college students, because the landlord would be more confident of actually collecting the rent each month without a big hassle. You'd also imagine that a higher return on capital would make a building worth more. If you thought you could raise rents in a certain building and essentially get more income with no investment, that property would be worth more than a building with stagnant rents. Finally, let's not forget competitive advantage. A building that was the last to go up before a zoning ordinance prevented adjacent new apartment buildings would be worth more than a building that potentially faced lots of new apartments competing with it. I'm not sure if I understood this part. I don't know if it's something very specific or unique to the US.
The competitive advantage, a building that was the last to go up before a zoning ordinance prevented adjacent new apartment buildings. So which means there was a certain ordinance that was passed in case there's, so in case of, I think other companies, maybe it's referencing to regulations, perhaps when a certain regulation comes up, right? And then it stops the other competitions from cropping, right? Now there can be no more buildings around that one. So it's the only one. So that regulation has sort of brought in the advantage. So that's what I could connect it to. If anybody else has anything else that could help us understand this.
Sheetal, I think that's what I also thought the same. It's like, you have these, a stretch of land with a row of apartments, and your building is the premium, and there is nothing around. So it gives you a lot of greenery and advantage in terms of the road is clear. So that's what I thought too.
Yeah, Richa is also adding, so regulations don't allow any more buildings. Yes, if there are new buildings which come up in this example, then it has competition, then it affects the cost, or how much rent the person can charge, right? But being a standalone building, he can charge whatever. If it can go either ways, perhaps. Of course, there are many other factors to be considered, but that's what I've understood. Does it help, Pavitra?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm just wondering, isolated building in Indian context would also be more, you can't come home late, or the security aspect. So I was more wondering
Yes.
would it apply to us.
So there's one more thing I'd just like to add. I don't know how relevant it would be, but I've kind of noticed that most of the residential areas which are in proximity to the airport, because there's a limitation on the floor, they command a certain premium. I would say Bangalore might be a different example because there it is 30 kilometers outside the city. But typically speaking, that also becomes a moat. So if you have these, premium condos, in the vicinity of the airport, you can actually charge a bomb. I mean, in Pune, a 2 BHK rent is 40-50,000, and that's a big deal, in a premium location. So I think that is one thing that comes to my mind. Not from a business perspective exactly, but maybe to a certain extent.
Okay, thank you for that. So Pavitra, if you could continue, and
Sure.
I think the last one is
Guess what? You've just learned the most important concepts that underpin the valuation of any company. The likelihood that those estimated future cash flows will actually materialize, risk, how large those cash flows will likely be, growth, how much investment will be needed to keep the business ticking along, return on capital, and how long the business can generate excess profits, economic moat. Keep these four factors in mind when using price multiples or any other valuation tool. You are certain to make better investing decisions.
the crux of the book.
Hmm.
All the reading we have done is for this paragraph.
Yeah, it is still a lot of research, right? Like for me, it's very new, but as far as I understood with the discussions, we are supposed to go look around what's happening around the company, dig information from different sources to understand how this, like, for example, a couple of people pointed out how they took care of retailers, how they took care of their employees. A lot of these signals won't be available in one point, right? Like in one source. It's a lot of information to be consumed and then make a decision probably.
Yes. Pavitra, are you doing the stocks program currently?
I've not yet started. I'm 2 weeks into Money Gym.
Okay.
So I'm finishing that up. But yes, I have enrolled for stocks program as well.
You're way ahead.
Sorry?
You're way ahead with this book. You'll be way ahead.
Oh, okay. I have not read actually since I just joined. So I've just joined to, kind of get that feel. Probably I'll start reading it, and if I have questions, I'll come back.
Yes. I think you should continue and read the next 2-3 paragraphs, because I think it'll be important to sort of close this chapter, invest, don't speculate.
Absolutely. Invest, don't speculate. There are three types of tools for valuing companies: price multiples, yields, and intrinsic values. All three valuable parts of the investing toolkit, and the wise investor will apply more than one to a prospective purchase. I'll go over price multiple and yields in the next chapter. Intrinsic values are a bit more complicated and generally require a somewhat technical method called discounted cash flow, which is a bit beyond the scope of this book. So he's recommending us to read another book, 5 Rules of Successful Stock Investing. Okay, we can continue. However, understanding price multiples and yields will be easier if we first detour briefly into what drives stock returns. Over long stretches of time, there are just two things that push a stock up or down: the investment return driven by earnings growth and dividends, and the speculative return driven by charges in the price earnings PE ratio. Think of the investment return as reflecting a company's financial performance and the speculative return as reflecting the exuberance or pessimism of other investors. A stock might go from $10 to $15 per share because earnings have increased from $1 per share to $1.50 per share, or because even though earnings stayed flat at $1 per share, the PE ratio increased from 10 to 15. In the first case, the stock was driven completely by investment return. In the latter case, the shares climbed solely due to speculative return. When you focus your investment search on companies with economic moats, you are focusing your potential investment return, because you're looking for companies that are likely to create economic value and increase their earnings over long periods of time. By paying close attention to valuation, you're minimizing the risk of a negative speculative return. That is, the odds that a change in the mood of other investors will hurt your investment performance. This is something I've always wondered. This whole mood of going bullish or bearish that kind of drives the entire market. After all, no one knows what a stock's speculative returns will be over the next 5 or 10 years. But we can make some pretty reasonable educated guesses about the investment return. Careful valuation will help insulate you against an adverse change in market emotion. Let's look at a real-world example.
We can pause here, Pavitra, because it's almost 6. But thank you so much for beautifully reading that for us. Thank you. Okay, so with this, again, I remind everybody to recommend a company or two that we together could study and bring into our discussion next week. Okay, and we continue with the next 2 chapters. That would be chapter 13, okay, and 14.
Sheetal, may I?
Yes, yes, Amanda.
I was thinking, I was looking when I asked you to repeat is because I was looking at ET Wealth. And on page 7, there is an article about sector report about white goods, which is about ceiling fans, So that gives Crompton Greaves. If you think about like Xerox is the word for photocopy, like we all think about Crompton Greaves as the fan, which has always been there. So that is covered and it has strong moats. That's what it talks about. I didn't go into detail about the share. I just checked the share price. It's only 439 rupees as of today. But that's what is leading in the market. And it talks about its advantages, which is on page 7 on ET Wealth. So that's what came to my mind. It's a 75-year-old company. I mean, I'm not saying we can do this thing. It just came to my mind as an Indian example. So you have like that is leading and it won't go away because with this kind of weather, we always need fans.
Yes. So we might take that up. Then that's totally fine. And if anybody else has any company in mind, then please do recommend. And let's read the chapters and use the framework given by the author to sort of help us study this one, okay? Because this has been one of the toughest subjects for me, at least, to even comprehend, So that's why. But thank you so much for everybody's here. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Smriti, for bringing in the knowledge that you've shared. Yeah, continue to read. Continue to read, and don't forget that Sunday morning we will be doing financial success models. So for your friends, if they would like to get financially educated, then that they can come to the free webinar on Sunday morning. And anybody who has been considering doing the stocks course, we will be starting with the stocks badge towards the end of June, so July. So do contact. Okay, so thank you so much. Take care, and everybody come back again next week. Okay, have fun. At 8 p.m. the Friday financial quiz will be on, so be there at 8 p.m. sharp. Lots of love, everybody. Have a great weekend. Keep making money. Bye-bye.